Hello and welcome to this stock analysis blitz for Airtel Africa. Thanks to my subscriber Botanix B for suggesting this stock. Before I start, please remember that I do these videos just for fun as a hobby and always speak to a qualified professional before making any investment decisions. So Airtel Africa are a FTSE 100 listed telecom who operate in Africa. Now actually 40% of their revenues come from Nigeria, but they also operate in all these other territories. They also pay quite a nice 4% dividend yield. We see that 46% of their revenues come from voice, with about a third of their revenues from data and 13% from Airtel Money, where they allow people access to banking products through their Airtel Money telephone banking product. Now, they have a history of quite excellent growth, particularly in data and in Airtel Money. And there is tremendous potential for further revenue growth of this company. In Africa, about 40 million people enter the workforce every year, and it's a very young population as well. So there's lots of people who might want to use the internet. And actually, only 47% of people even have a SIM card in a lot of these countries. So there's excellent potential for Airtel Africa to continue this amazing growth. And it's particularly interesting how in the money, I mean, Airtel Africa have these kiosks all over Africa, and in a lot of these villages, there just isn't a local bank. So with their Airtel Money, it allows an opportunity for local people to gain access to banking for the first time. Yes, so both the historical growth and the future growth potential is enormous for this company. And to give you some idea of that, I kind of find these numbers incredulous, but according to my interpretation of their annual report, they have 80,000 shops and kiosks across Africa, and these products are available from 1.8 million outlets who they partner with as well. So so there really is incredible potential here. I was listening to their latest analyst report, and I picked up that, however, they are impacted by currency devaluation or by inflation in these countries. So as you can see here, although there was quite incredible revenue growth of 18% when you consider the local valued in the local currencies, when you then think of inflation and then go back to their reporting currency, which is US dollar, that only then equates to 12% currency growth. So they do have some quite big headwinds in terms of inflation. And I took a look at inflation numbers for their main markets and found that whereas typically you'd be talking about 10% inflation on average, recently there's been a real spike in inflation, and there's 22% inflation in Nigeria and in the Congo this year. So there are some quite bad and quite recent headwinds in terms of inflation that you need to think about with this company. And also something else that came up in their latest analyst call was that there's some severe problems in Nigeria with fuel price increases. Apparently in Nigeria, because there isn't any kind of proper electrical grid, they have to use generators to power all their telecom towers and things. And so they are impacted by fuel price inflation. And actually, only a few days ago, Nigeria got a new prime minister, and one of the first things he did was take away this fuel subsidy. And I believe that was something like 40% of the overall cost. So this is some news that's come in even after that investor presentation where they were complaining about fuel prices. Well, according to this, the Nigerian government has now increased fuel prices even more. So again, this is a severe headwind that we've got to think about with Airtel Africa. So looking at their history, and they IPO'd only in 2019 in a IPO that valued them at a massive 3.1 billion. And then they quite quickly started getting some deals with MasterCard and Western Union, which then sets them up with their Airtel Africa money product. We see a number of capital raisers, including 200 million from Qatar's investment fund, And they also achieved getting this 500 million revolving credit facility. So they've had to, so they've been successful in raising quite a lot of money to help them grow, but they also rely on this money for their growth. And there's been a lot of interest in the Airtel Africa money part of their business, with the Rise Fund investing 200 million, MasterCard investing 100 million, and Qatar investing 200 million into their Airtel Africa money subsidiary. And this, of course, and this is a bit of a seal of approval for what I think is actually their most interesting part of their business. I think they really could be part of a revolution in the prosperity which making banking available to everyone could achieve in Africa. Finally, in 2022, they got things going with some banking services in Nigeria, but they still aren't. But they still haven't managed to roll out Airtel Africa money in Nigeria. But obviously, if they did, and they've got the groundwork here for that, that would obviously be a severe boost to that would be a really good boost to their revenues. So looking at their numbers, and the first thing that's clear is with telecoms companies, there's a lot of money going in and going out. This is the first telecom I've looked at. Looking at the expenditure, and we have the network operating, which is costs, which are very high at about 817 million. Then access charges. I had a good look at the annual report, and I couldn't work out what that meant. Also, there's this other operating expenses, which again I'd looked at the annual report, and it wasn't really clear to me what they were. And so together, that's like a whole billion of grey area, which I don't understand. Obviously, the license and spectrum usage fees are self-explanatory at 244 million, as are employee benefits and sales and marketing. But overall, there's a lot of money they have to spend in all these different things. Particularly, we see what stands out is their depreciation and amortization. So with a telecoms company, they have to continually invest in new technology every year. And actually, because of how the minds of accountants work, this new investment doesn't come in as a cost. It goes in their assets as their capex. So that whenever they do these big investments, you kind of want to see it as a current expense, but it doesn't. It just goes in as an asset, but then that gets amortized every year, and so that explains these large depreciation and amortization expenses every year. And so it makes telecoms, a little bit discomforting when you're trying to understand their numbers, because they're having to continually spend all this money every year on new technology. And then in terms of their income and loss statement, then you've got this big drag of amortization every year resulting from that, in this process where they're continually having to then reinvest and come up with money for new investments to replace their old capex as it becomes outdated. So generally, it's a fairly awkward to understand presentation, as is probably the case for all telecoms, at least for me as a beginner coming into telecoms. But what we can say is they've got a very healthy growth in their operating profit and a nice growth in their net income, certainly over the last 3 years. By the way, the numbers for 2023 I've guesstimated based on their first half results. And so when we look at their net income history, there is a really nice trend in their income moving away from their expenditure there, which is, a very positive thing. So looking at their assets, it's quite notable that their current assets are half their short-term liabilities. So generally that wouldn't be considered a good thing. I'd definitely like to go and take a look at Vodafone, so I've got some kind of telecoms comparator. But I'm guessing this is a sign that we're dealing with a telecoms company. Generally, you wouldn't look at that in a positive way. When we look at their debt, one extra complication is because of their Airtel Africa money, they're actually a bank as well as a telecoms company. And of course, banks are very difficult to understand their numbers. And so we've got this complication. For example, they've got well over 500 million of people who've deposited with their Airtel money there that goes in current assets as cash. But then that's also goes in as a liability in their short-term liabilities. We look at their trade receivables as fairly low, 136 million, but they also have to have a lot of cash on hand just to operate their business. And then when we go down to the short-term liabilities, we see that actually, we see trade payables there which outweigh the trade receivables. And there's things like financial assets and other current liabilities. So the main thing is, I don't know if this is the complication. A lot of this might be the complication of you dealing with both a telecoms and a banking company rolled into one. There's no way that with the time I spend on a stock market blitz video, I can really get my head around that. And we've just got to chalk up that their current assets are half their current liabilities, and I don't have a good understanding of why, without spending loads more time and perhaps taking a look at Vodafone as well to see if that could help me as well. When I look at their long-term assets, we've got obviously their property, plant, and equipment, their current capex, their working capital, right of use assets, a lot of other intangibles and things. So again, it's a bit of a mush of things that are hard for me to put my finger on. One thing that I can pick out is that they've got a lot of intangible assets. In fact, a lot of goodwill. Now, obviously, the branding is important, and with a telecoms company, you've got a big inventory of customers there, which are really which are a reasonable intangible asset, which you can expect to make money from in the future. But still, that doesn't make the job very easy in terms of valuation. And it's notable that about 40% of their overall assets are these intangible assets. So that's not generally something I favour when I value a stock. When I look at their long-term liabilities, I guess the main thing to pick out is that they are 2 million in debt. When you, in fact, that's if you combine their short-term and their long-term liabilities. Their debt seems to cycle into and out of their short-term every couple of years, and but overall, if we consider it in total, they've got 2 billion of debt. This 680 million here, I thought needed an explanation, and it turns out that's put options related to the investment that the Rise Fund and MasterCard did into their money business. So overall, it's very difficult to really properly get my head around their balance sheet in a way that I can do fairly easily with more simpler stocks. And so really I can just have to leave it at that. I'd have to spend a lot more time, which I'll do for a full video than I do with a stock market blitz video, to really say I can understand that. All I can say really is that they've got a nice growth trend. They have 2 billion of debt, and the general trend's good for their debt. But other than that, it's a bit of a mush, I'm afraid. And I've got my visual presentation here, and you do see the debt going down. You do see a nice growth in their net income. In terms of valuation, so in terms of price to book, they've got obviously a very favourable price to book here at the moment. However, remember that 40% of that is intangibles, particularly goodwill. In terms of their future growth, I've got a very crude kind of discounted cash flow model that I've started to work on. Now, remember, I'm only an amateur, so go and speak to your financial advisor for your own assessment. But for my purposes, I've considered a conservative best case and worst case in terms of revenue growth, but then also a conservative best case and worst case in terms of inflation, where my best case is 20% inflation. So I have been very conservative there. This, using my very crude model, I've then got here the best case and worst case for cash I think they can bring in as profit over the next 5 years. And we see for the worst case, they're probably not interesting. For the best case, though, they are very interesting. And so, I think this stock has been fairly undervalued anyway because of the Africa risks. Obviously, it's a very exciting stock in terms of the future growth potential. I mean, they've got an amazing growth history as well. You've got this amazing story of bringing banking to people in these remote locations with the Airtel money. I'm very excited about this stock. A very compelling investment case, but for now, particularly when you consider the inflation issues in Africa at the moment, and what's just happened with this fresh news of the Nigerian government taking away the fuel subsidies, I would certainly want to wait it out a bit. But this stock definitely deserves to make it to my third division watch list. So on the basis of this brief stock analysis blitz video, they're definitely interesting enough for me to add them to my third division watch list. And I'm hopeful that moving forward, I'll be able to get more time to then look at them more carefully because they're a very interesting stock to me. So that concludes my stock analysis blitz for Airtel Africa. I hope you found this useful. Make sure you speak to your financial advisor though before doing anything, and good luck with your own investments. Please read the disclaimer. Remember that prices can go down as well as up.